As an architect, I saw the graphics, I saw what kind of scenarios they were using to induce the phobia, and they were crap. They were really, seriously, really bad. They have this obsession that people have for virtual reality of copying real life, and I'm totally against that, right? Because if we change the use, we need to change the architecture.
Modernism, and we all know modernism happened, and it was a sort of a change in the fabric of time. Before modernism, our medieval cities pretty much made forms which were the resultant of the craftsmanship that was being done. It was not the architect or the engineer, it was the craftsman who was building.
Enclosure and excitement and emotional trigger and emotional involvement with space. That is not this.
I mean, we're all born from a womb which is like a cocoon. And then
exactly.
yet we cube ourselves into these sort of concrete boxes or glass boxes, and the cities are filled with glass boxes.
Hello everyone and good evening. Welcome. Yeah. My name is Ira Dubey and I'm very excited for the third season of VC Live and would like to welcome all of you to the very first episode of VC Live Season 3. VC Live is an initiative by the Godrej Value Co-Creators Club, GVCC, founded by Godrej Locks and Architectural Fittings and Systems. The Godrej Value Co-Creators Club, GVCC, was established a few years ago as a dedicated platform to nurture the architectural and interior design community all over the world. For those who haven't joined us yet, the link to our membership is right here in this chat, so do so. And to our existing members, a very, very warm welcome back. The club now boasts over 2,000 practitioners and continues to grow stronger and stronger every day. We host various community-led activities, of which VC Live is our flagship program. So let's take a quick look at what GVCC is all about.
Welcome to the Godrej Value Co-Creators Club, where innovation meets collaboration. GVCC is a unique platform for architects and interior designers to merge their creative visions with our innovative product offerings, building safe, sustainable, and optimized solutions for consumers. We aim to cultivate a network of thought leaders, driving innovation and excellence in the industry. Celebrate your achievements with our GV's Awards, recognizing innovative projects across various verticals. Join our community through exhibition visits and masterclasses to stay updated on the latest trends and technologies. Enjoy exclusive access to new products, special discounts, and tours of our Mumbai and Goa plants. Join the Godrej Value Co-Creators Club today. Be part of a community that values innovation, collaboration, and sustainability.
Now, it gives me great pleasure to invite and have a chat with none other than the Executive Vice President and Business Head of Godrej Locks and Architectural Fittings and Systems, Mr. Shyam Motwani. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
See you.
Thank you very much, Ira.
Thank you for joining us here today, sir. First things first, could you share a little bit more about what makes this season 3 more exciting, bigger, better, more enriching for us all?
Well, I think, we have, kind of unveiled a new theme for this season, which we have, thoughtfully articulated basis a lot of, feedback and engagement and the kind of engagement that helps us understand the emerging needs and expectations. With the various, I think, creative minds and, the top-notch luminaries in the field of architecture and interior design we've been working with over the past. And I think one of the things that seem to have emerged, in a way unequivocally, given the fact that technology now is driving almost everything that we see around us, we thought it fit to call it the future forward, approach to design and architecture insofar as the kind of new environments we want to build, including use all the technology that we can muster to drive sustainability insofar as practices of design and architecture are concerned. So that's what I think is the flavor of this new season, if I may call it.
Yes. Thank you so much for enlightening us on what is really the order of the day. I think you talked about two very, very important things. The future of technology, of course, and how that applies to our lives in every way, sometimes scarily so, and sustainability. Thank you so much. Is there anything else that you want to share with us about this theme, Future Forward, before we meet our very special panelists today?
No, I think so far as the audiences are concerned, our own potential new users of ideas that we together co-create. I think what we are looking at so far as future forward is concerned is how do we weave some of the thoughts, and if there are any revolutionary ones and ideas that we can incorporate in the various projects that we can do for our clients and users, which could also lead to some more I think thought that can get generated in the newer set of people, the younger bunch of people who I think are very different in terms of their responses to what we're seeing around us, the stimuli that we kind of receive each day. And I
Yes.
think the responses that we would want the youngsters to really come up with basis the inputs that we give them, especially involving technology, whether it is digital technology, whether it is materials related to the kind of stuff that we use for making goods and services available, and also the kind of other finishes that we can provide, and all within the ages of sustainability, because I think that's something that the future generations have to be really concerned, and we have to leave behind for the future generations think that they can also really be enjoying and be part of, rather than consuming all that we have in this century. So I think all I'm looking at is how do we really weave this thinking of future forward in our design thinking, with all the luminaries and bright minds that we want to engage with, and the privilege that we would have of hosting them in
Yes.
this new season.
Yes.
And for us, this is the best platform, as we see a monthly series that we run, which is very interactive and educational with experts in architecture and design. And given that our commitment at Godrej has been to drive meaningful conversations with the community of architecture specialists and design specialists, as we've done in the past, and our focus is largely today, very honestly, technology, technology, and what kind of innovations can this drive as a catalyst. And the second thing that our focus is largely sustainability. So I
Thank you
think
so
that's what we are aiming at.
That's
And
very, very beautifully said. Thank you. That was very
thank you.
inspiring. And I cannot wait to see what kind of conversations we're going to spark today. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our two very exciting speakers who are here. Thank you so much, Mr. Motwani, for joining us again.
Many thanks, Ira. Thank you.
Let's dive straight into the topic for episode 1,
Sure.
Designing the Future. I'm thrilled to introduce our distinguished speakers for today's conversation. First, we have none other than Mariana Cabugueira, Architect Director, Award winner, founder of MC Studios. Mariana has significantly contributed to both physical architecture and digital design. As a senior architect at Zaha Hadid Architects, she has worked on iconic projects like Navi Mumbai Airport and in our own homegrown Mumbai, Amchi Mumbai, and Tower C in Shenzhen. In 2022, she founded MC Studios to bridge the physical and digital realms in architecture. She's an academic, head tutor, research studio director, and she has received the Digital Futures Award in 2023. Welcome, Mariana.
Thank you so much, Ira. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's also a huge pleasure to be sharing the stage with Manish. So it's going to be a great time, like 1 hour just flowing. I hope everyone gets entertained and intrigued. Hope that everyone has like a question by the end of it. So again, thank you for the invitation.
Looking forward to it. Our next wonderful speaker today is none other than Manish Gulati, co-founder of OFA Studios, a pioneer in parametric and computational design in India. With over 75 awards to his name, he's celebrated for his bold and innovative approach to architecture and design. Under his leadership, MoFA Studios has become a leader in contemporary architecture, known for its cutting-edge designs. Manish is also dedicated to mentoring young architects and integrating technology into design. I am very excited to hear this wonderful conversation that is going to unfold in front of us today. Let's dive right into it. Over to you, Manish.
Thank you so much, Ira, for that wonderful introduction. And hi, Mariana. It's lovely meeting you once again. So, before we dive into today's discussion on AI and the metaverse, for which Mariana is known for, and she's doing some amazing work on it, the virtual world and the real world, its fears, its joys, I would like to look at the entire thing from a vast philosophical point of view. And continuing on our discussion, Mariana, this whole idea of illusionary world, the concept of samsara, Brahman, and Maya, these are not unknown to those who are aware of the Indian spiritual philosophies. I was discussing about that yesterday with you. Mm-hmm. There's a book that worded it about 7,000 years ago. It also formed the foundation to a lot of modern philosophies. Bhagavad Gita talks about Maya as an illusionary world, whereas samsara is the real world where continuous cycle of birth and rebirth happens. So that's where your avatars happen. One continues to live in this samsara through various avatars till one reaches moksha, which is the ultimate bliss. We're all aiming for that happiness. Why are we building everything? To reach that ultimate bliss, the blissful state. And you do that through your actions, or karma, as you call it in Bhagavad Gita. So interestingly, as per Gita, the real world that we live in today is referred to as Maya. Whereas the inner state of being, our mind, is the key to the real world, is called Brahman, the universe that surrounds us. And one oscillates between the two worlds continuously in order to attain the ultimate bliss. So it's like, how the famous French philosopher René Descartes said, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. Do I exist in the reality, or it's only in my mind? Is my reality your reality too, or we are all part of a bigger illusion seen from a different point of view in the universe? What is real, what's unreal, is all what my mind tells me to believe in. Ultimately, it's all in the mind. You could be real, I could be unreal. So on that note, I would like you to talk about your recent successful project, Metamorph, and your experience in designing the virtual world, which very much could be the new reality.
Thank you, Manish. And also, like we spoke yesterday, I was not aware about all of this philosophical background that obviously comes from an Indian culture. I visited India like 5 years ago, and I did see a very different culture that I was not expecting, much deeper in every sense, especially spiritually. And then, funny enough, most of my projects, the most iconic and memorable projects, are in India, actually. And then, even more interesting enough, my tool of choice for crafting digital architecture is called Maya, which is a peculiar tool. It's not like everyone uses. I'm an advocate for that tool. Most of the people go for Rhino, or nothing against Rhino. I really like Rhino. But they go for Blender, they go through 3ds Max, but I'm called the Maya Queen because I don't give up on that tool. And it is the most important tool for me, even to create virtual worlds as well. So it kind of blends beautifully with the rhetoric and the philosophy that you shared with me yesterday and today. So it's actually really, really pretty, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to use it in the future. So right now, I started doing digital worlds 2 years ago. I left Zara, and I was invited to direct the architecture department of a very big metaverse company, American. And I was one of the first architects that they hired, even though they had already 100, 200 people working there. It was very shocking that I was the first architect hired, and they were designing a virtual city. So imagine a virtual city being designed by no architect, like game designers, graphic designers. Because that's what our web is right now, right? We are already living this digital life. And it's being designed by UI and UX designers, graphic designers, game designers who don't really care. I mean, their user experience is very two-dimensional. Our user experience is absolutely three-dimensional, right, in our cities. We are trained to live cities in 4 dimensions. And for the first time, we are being encouraged, challenged to do this virtually. So we can only make sense that an architect is involved. And so the project that you mentioned, it actually became from a time in which I had to see the virtual world with more profit than just the gaming and entertainment side. Not that it's not valid, because I do see like a value in digital entertainment. But I had to see past that, like how can we improve society? I mean, we are architects, we are obsessed with improving society and future and people. So I had to see how can we improve this, how can we improve our mindset, how can we empower humans, especially in the age of AI? How can AI and virtual reality actually empower us to overcome, in this case, our phobias? So the project comes from something called VRET, which is virtual reality exposure therapy, and it's simple because it's very conventional. It comes from a therapy that you would go through if you have a phobia, like arachnophobia or claustrophobia, or a phobia of the bottom of the ocean, and this is stopping you from living a normal life. You would go to a therapist. Usually, a therapist decides to fix your problem with something called exposure therapy. The therapist induces hypnosis, so you are unconscious. And the therapist has the role to dictate the fictional scenario and introduce you to your phobia object mentally, and changing the scale and your proximity to this phobia. So imagine you have arachnophobia. Your therapist will have to, every session, increase this proximity in your mind to a spider that is increasing in size, that is increasing in density. And every therapy would increase the level of stress until you no longer have a phobia. And then obviously VR came, and we don't hear about this, but for the last 10 years, the VR community is actually trying to bring this into therapy, bringing headsets, bringing the scenario. So you're no longer in hypnosis, you're no longer in subconscious, you are awake, you are seeing the phobia scenario, and your therapist is conducting. And then as an architect, I saw the graphics, I saw what kind of scenarios they were using to induce the phobia, and they were crap. They were really, seriously, really bad. They have this obsession that people have for virtual reality of copying real life, and I'm totally against that, right? Because if we change the use, we need to change the architecture. So I was really angry about the type of graphics, but I also saw an opportunity of like, let's make this happen. Let's bring architects into designing elegant, sophisticated worlds that serve for something, that have a profit. And in this case, it was the cognitive health and virtual reality for exposure therapy. So that's kind of where the project that you mentioned comes from. It's to find a use in virtual reality that is past entertainment.
We are moving towards the multiverse universe. So there is the reality that we are living in. There is physical world where architecture still continues to happen. And then there is the metaverse where newer realities are soon coming in. And we are moving towards another planet. We're moving towards another thing. So there is this whole cycle of architecture and the architects who've been constructing in a certain way. And you are moving away from all of that. And I think what will be interesting for people to know that when you move from the physical world to the virtual world, what do you carry from here to there? What are the common points? How much boundaries do you blur, and how much you kind of make it different? So that is extremely important to understand. Is it absolutely opposite? Or there are clues and markers from this world that you take to the other world?
That's also a common question that I get, and I would also like to know your opinion. If what our ancestors left us, form follows function. If function does change, which I bet you love, if function changes radically in a digital world, what kind of form follows up, right? So that's something that I also struggle quite a lot. But since we are reverting the roles now, let's pick up on something more physical. So I saw the project that you sent me, the National Institute of Water Sports in Goa. And it has we do have some very strong common points, and that is challenging geometry and challenging architecture and challenging form specifically. And I know the kind of criticisms that you probably get from it, because I also get them on why. And you went even more ambitious. You went for a different kind of fabrication. It was not just the architecture itself, but it was, let's also radically change the fabrication methods, even though you had like such limited resources, like you told me yesterday. So my first question to you will be, do you see a need in challenging geometry in architecture and challenging the fabrication methods in architecture. Is this a need, or is this because as an architect we want to challenge?
Mariana, we have to go back more than 100 years to answer this question. Modernism, and we all know modernism happened and it was a sort of a change in the fabric of time. Before modernism, our medieval cities pretty much made forms which were the resultant of the craftsmanship that was being done. It was not the architect or the engineer, it was the craftsman who was building. It was the available technique that we were doing. Talking about the future, if you're talking only India, by 2036, we would require more than 93 million housing units. So to build that, that's the number. Yeah, it's a crazy number. In order to build that, would you rather prefer to live in the pigeonholes of the modernist language, or something that is more natural, something that is more attuned to your natural rhythm of living? In our medieval cities, we built uh, architecture which was very much symbiotic with what nature was. You could grow your own food where you were living. So you had a castle, you had a house, you could grow your food right behind that. You could have your entire functions with nature very much in sync. With the urban cities, with the complex scenarios that are happening today, do you think modernism was always the answer, or it was just a mistake that happened somewhere in the fabric of time? And we need to sort of retrace our
I
steps
agree.
back. Before modernism was Gaudi, and we all know what Gaudi was doing, and he was using technology. The form was very much resultant of the technology that he was doing. So it's not so
Mhm.
much about aesthetic appeal of the form. You also know that the forms
Mhm.
are more to do with your biorhythms, your way of living, how well you integrate nature. I mean, you look at your Shenzhen Tower, the way the lower 10 floors come down and open the green space. You think a modernist box could do that? A modernist box is just a closed box. And if we have to move forward, the form has to respond to what the human needs are, to what the cities need in the future.
Mhm.
And looking at the way we are increasing, the way we are multiplying as humans, the answer does not lie in building the way we have been building till now by pouring tons and tons of concrete, but something that evolves more as a crafted technique. And with the densities that we're talking about, I don't think the craftsman doing by hand is the answer
Mhm.
anymore. So digital
Mhm.
fabrication in future, whether it is 3D printing, whether it is CNC milling, whatever you call it, it is the process that's done in the factory. You could create customized solutions. I mean, we've been doing prefab since 1960s, but prefab gives you the same cookie cutter design. And what we are looking at in the future is something that is away from the cookie cutter design, that goes with individual needs of every person who's living in. And the key to that is the algorithmic thinking and digital fabrication. So this project was only a sort of an attempt to understand the industry, where we are. We all have
Mhm.
come from a place where we've been taught modernist architecture. You come from a place which was obsessed with modernism. I come from school of thought in my country here. More than 90% of architects are still following modernist principles. Form follows function is a Miesian philosophy, but does it hold true for the future? Is it holding true
Mhm.
anymore, or was it only a post-war
Mhm.
philosophy? I mean, there are lots
Mhm.
of these questions. So this whole thing was an attempt to see, with limited resources, if one was to use the machines or a cobotic environment with people, craftsmanship, and machines, how well could you do it? It's not the technology
Mhm.
that's expensive, one realized.
Mhm.
It's the people who propagate the technology that makes it more expensive. And everywhere, it's the education system. Right
Yeah.
from there, the DNA of design, everything probably needs an overhaul. And not just here,
Yeah.
everywhere. You're trying to do that in the virtual world. You've done that at Zahadi Associates. I mean, we all are trying a different method where we can go away from the modernistic idioms of just
Yeah.
pouring concrete and making customized solutions which can be fabricated.
Definitely. Like just what you're saying, I'm thinking about two very different things. Like one, definitely the question on most of us and probably most of the people who are listening, why do we have to go against the tide to explain to architects or to anyone who accepts a project that biological beings need organic, irregular spaces? And why most of us, like you, for example, we have this in common. It was going against the tide the
Yes.
whole time, all of our academia, all of our profession. Like, why did we sign up for that, first of all? And then and then why, who are our biggest obstacles? Why are there obstacles for this? That's one thing that makes me kind of wonder while we were speaking. And then the other one was, and I didn't want to jump into this topic so fast, but it is kind of pressing for me. Like, is the discovery of pouring concrete just a small sample of what will happen when we discover automated buildings through artificial intelligence? Because in countries like India or China that has big numbers and need quick solutions, I'm pretty sure automation is in real danger to devalue craftsmanship, which takes longer and it has care and it has love. And automation does not have any, but it has quick answers and efficiency. So that also makes me wonder if are we going against another tide by defending craftsmanship in a country that needs faster numbers and probably will have faster results without total automation with AI? Is this another tide? And who is going to fight against that one? Because it's probably not our generation, but the next generation will. Definitely. They will have to decide if they're going to automate their results fully for numbers, or if they are going to fight for craftsmanship and for love in architecture and love in spaces for people.
I don't think craftsmanship can be seen in isolation as an entity. It's a knowledge. It's a knowledge that's been passed on from generations to generations in every country, in every place. And much before in India, before we started writing things, craftsmanship was passed on from one generation to another just by the use of words. And that inherent knowledge, if combined with technology, the principles are laid down by the craftsmanship. What Gaudi did today, what he did 100 years ago, laid down principles of what we're doing today with digital fabrication. So I don't think craftsmanship is something that will get lost. Yes, in spirit, it will continue to happen. Maybe the craftsman changes. Maybe the same craftsman who was working by hand, his next generation is using the computers to do the same thing. And that's happening in India. I'm seeing fourth or the fifth generation craftsmen adapting to digital fabrication, and they are doing it in the most brilliant manner than somebody who's picking it up as a random corporate taking up and saying, let's just buy a 3D printer and let's start working with it. Compared to that, somebody who's had a history of craftsmanship has been able to adapt to that in a much better manner because it's there in the DNA.
But even sorry for interrupting, but even like for what I do right now, and I started as like the digital designer, and now even with this mainstream use of AI, they do see me as a craftsmanship, as a craftswoman. And I do feel it, and I do feel that I'm crafting spaces, digitally crafting them, but they are absolutely crafted. What does it have to change in the terminology of craftsmanship that it is done digitally, but it still applies? What is it? Is it on the practice of manipulating fully something, or is it because you leave less margin for an automation or less margin for a standardization on form? So what makes it craftsmanship? Because I can see it migrating to a digital one, and it having a big meaning.
So I have a question for you on that note. I think we are arriving at a point where we're talking about the education system. We're talking about the younger generation adapting to technology, the loss of craftsmanship and the principles. You've been using AI. You've started incorporating AI in the best possible manner in the way you're working. You think AI coming into the School of Designs, would it make the future generations more complacent to learning skills that help develop their minds in the field of art and architecture? Or would they still sort of continue working with hand and combine the two together?
Serious concerns on that. For one reason, not because it shouldn't be used. Yes, it should be used. But I've seen some very talented craftsmen students, digitally crafts, and they had to go through the pain of learning the tool, how to use the tool, right? And I'm imagining even like a Michelangelo sculpting, and he had to learn the tool, and that took him a long time until he achieved the type of creation he had in his mind. And I think AI does mitigate this, or it does encourage this laziness for not learning the tool to achieve your vision, right? And we might miss out, and it's fine if some people would need it, and maybe some people don't want to to use the tool. Not everyone knows how to craft as well. Really, it is something that I've seen. Some people are meant for that, some people are not meant for that. But my only concern is, well, how many pearls are we going to miss because they went to the laziest path of not handing the tool? I teach software for the past 7 years, and there are clear students that were meant to learn it, and they are going to suffer for a year. But when they come through that suffering, their projects are, like, you can tell. You look at the project like, wow. And there are some of them that they will never manage the tool. Like, I know, and I cannot tell them, but I can tell that you will never manage.
Right.
It's probably just, I just hope that in the future, we just don't all decide to go to the lazy path, because as humans, if there's something that connects us is this laziness, we do like to be comfortable and suffering less, right? Like to do less. And I hope that there will still survive the craft ones and the unique, because I also believe that uniqueness comes from craftsmanship.
Right. I mean, craft has survived. Craft has survived for centuries. When camera was invented, they said the art would be dead, painting would be dead. But you know, with the advent of camera, art did not die; it took a new form. So the craftsmanship changes. And there will always be people who will be complacent versus people who will be hardworking to achieve the goals. That's just the way the human mind is worked out. But the bigger question, and I wanted to ask this to you, and I've been asking this, and people have been asking this, is does use of AI, and because it gives you these picture perfect images, which are so beautiful, does it make the design more absolute in that sense? Because, you know, when you're exploring design as an architecture student or as an architect, you sketch, you do modeling, you clay model, there's a tactility, there is a sort of softness, there's a cloud which is not definite. But with the AI, everything is so definite. So does that form a picture of an absolute design?
It's a good question, because I don't know if I would formulate it like that. I would probably see, I think the bigger question is, AI is pitch perfect. That bothers me a bit. It's almost like an overload of candy. It's almost like you ate too much sugar. On all of them. On all of them. You feel like nauseated at some point of how candy licked, smooth, you know, and that's not the kind of beauty that we appreciate at all. Like, humans actually like a beauty that is quirky, that it has something weird, that is not fully symmetric, that it has like a little hint of ugliness, that we are kind of unsettled. So I think that kind of beauty will survive. And I think that's actually what makes us see something that was AI generated and say immediately, this is AI generated. It's because there is an excess of free beauty that has no quirkiness, that has no flaws. Even if you prompt the flaw, it's not a real flaw, right? The same reason that, like, we like humans, we appreciate human beauty, but we are fully unsymmetric, and we are asymmetric completely. But we still, that's our constant, our nonce of beauty anyway. And I don't think AI will see that. And I think that's what makes it also unique when we design, because we let this ugliness come through. Like, for example, there was a time at Zaha that it was kind of a weird time, but they asked me to start doing ugly things with the word ugly. And I was so confused. And I was like, what? And we were at the pub even with my leads, and he was like, Mariana, you need to start doing ugly. I was like, I don't want to do ugly. Why would I want to design ugly? And then so many years after, I still question that, like, what is the real beauty in architecture if it's not also adding this unsettling, so ugly, the word is unsettling side to it, right? Which your project is also very much, because it is sort of unsettling. Right? How do you stand on that?
I've always believed in anomalies, the chaos. So, I mean, India is a lot about planned chaos. You see chaos, and I mean, a very simple example is you have a traffic junction in India, which probably doesn't have any traffic lights, but yet there are lesser accidents because you always know on the other side, and there is this balance that everybody knows how to survive in this ecosystem. And that chaos and that anomaly is something that leads us on from taking us away from that picture perfect world. And my fight, as always, for last 20 years has been to not make that picture postcard image of architecture, to create that bit of attention, to create that bit of something that's left behind, something that's a question mark. I think a question is more important than an answer all the time. With every project. A project needn't answer every time. It should always leave a question for the next project. And that is important for every design process. And when you talk about the history of architecture, it has survived and it has progressed because there have been the right questions that have been left by the people who have practiced. People who have created absolute designs somehow has died down, and those it is not progressed in that direction. So when you say ugly, I call it an anomaly. I call it a chink in the entire perfect system.
Exactly.
Maybe that's the key. Maybe that's the key to the entire thing. And you are jumping between the virtual world and you also design for the real world. I mean, you call it the mixed reality. You are designing buildings and the forms and the cities. I saw the design that you're working for. You're redesigning Miami in the metaverse. So the forms are a takeoff from from the real world, but they're not something which cannot be built. They can
Exactly.
very much be built. So at what point, I mean, do you think that there is enough ecosystem of engineering, financial sustainability, environmental sustainability in this world? Is it progressing it together that those forms that you're designing in metaverse could actually be made into its physical manifestations? Is it happening?
They will only happen if digital fabrication becomes more mainstream.
Yes.
If we turn digital fabrication into a common method, as common as putting concrete together, as pouring concrete. And like we said yesterday, I think that the boxes that we have been trained to do in our academia years, which nothing against boxes, but everything against boxes, they come not from our willing desire to live in boxes. I don't even think that the 90 degrees around us, they actually come from a comfort desire. And I'm pretty sure that every architecture that has a chamfer or a fillet will probably nurture you more than the architecture that is above us or around us. And then, like I mentioned yesterday, when they gave us the tools and the freedom, for example, with the AI generation, everyone was doing fluid design. And that was a very big sign that we actually crave for organic spaces. We crave for them because we lived in them much longer than the spaces, the 90-degree blocks. We lived in organic spaces for much longer, our species did. And it was the lack of tools, it was the lack of encouragement from our teachers, from academia. And it was because whenever we solved the gravity with our tea, right, in prehistorical years, we did the tea with stones, and we said, that's how you solve it. And then we made it cheaper along the years. So every time you solve with the tea, like the Stone Age, it will be cheaper, it will be faster, everyone will be happier, we can build more. And then we kind of populated the whole earth with this cheap and fast, efficient. But if digital fabrication catches up and it becomes as cheap and as fast, and with the same knowledge dissemination when you are in school, I believe we'll start doing the architecture that we want.
Right.
I truly believe that. I don't know if you're going to see it, but I am here for making it happen, honestly.
Yeah.
Besides me and besides my willing of expression and your willing of expression, because we also have that, right? In architecture, we take it as a freedom to express ourselves. We also have that hint. But besides that is, how would the humans be more comfortable?
Yeah.
How would we get back to a space of enclosure and excitement and emotional trigger and emotional involvement with space that is not this.
I mean, we're all born from a womb which is like a cocoon, and then
Exactly.
yet we cube ourselves into these sort of concrete boxes or glass boxes, and the cities are filled with glass boxes. But there is a sort of an ethical question in India when it comes down to digital fabrication, and that is that there is a huge amount of population which is available for construction industry. And in spite of having so much of large population that's doing it, it would take away jobs. It gives you job opportunities. The construction industry hires the maximum number of people. And that question always remains that where do those people go? Interestingly, post-COVID, a lot of them did go back to the villages into the agriculture because India has a huge agricultural base as well. And the agriculture industry started flourishing more. I mean, a lot of them did not even return back to the city for construction. So if my personal opinion, I would rather have a lot of people grow food because that's going to be the need for the future. You need food ultimately, and you have to grow it. You need people to grow it. You need a workforce to grow it. Leave the construction to the technology to a great level. So with digital fabrication, even if you don't get the agricultural laborers to work, it's still okay. as far as I'm concerned. I don't know how it is from where you come from. How is it in Europe or in UK?
Very similar. We also depend a lot on agriculture, and it's a good agriculture as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, would you rather have people growing food or constructing buildings? Is a big question.
That's a tough
You are Middle East where you.
No, can I
It's a
also
question
be
that can't
honest?
be
That
answered.
there is a little bit of a decision that I don't share this around much, but there's a reason of me joining the virtual world. It also comes from feeling a little bit like an hypocrite when I'm building physical. I do have a little feeling of like, why am I bringing sand to the beach? You know? And although in India it is a need because of numbers, you should question what the numbers do, to be honest, and population numbers. I'm a big fan of India. It's probably the country that I'm the closest around the whole world, especially on spirituality and culture rich and history. I think the population numbers ruined it. If it was half, imagine how rich the country will be. Imagine. So I would question the numbers before the need of building. But let's say you do have like a huge need of building. Okay, so it comes from a need. But not all countries have a need of building. Many times I would feel like an hypocrite. And again, I don't share this much as well. And we're being recorded. But I would feel like an hypocrite to be building houses, entire housing complex that are meant for rich people to have their seventh house and wait for the profit to go up, never living there. Wait for the profit to go up and then sell them for higher. They're assets. They are just assets. Sell them for higher. The next one will also buy it. They will not going to live in there. They're going to wait for the value to increase. They're going to sell it back. They're going to sell it. Their assets. They're assets with a huge footprint in our world. And I feel extremely complicit in doing so and being one of, I'm not the client, but I'm an enabler of that. So, and that hurt me a little bit. And I have a physical project going on for India, like we mentioned, and I love it and I love to do it. Does it hurt a little bit that I feel like I'm bringing more problems than solving them? I mean, obviously it does, and that led me to let's do it virtually. Let's create these mega assets that are not meant for living, because they are not meant for living. Most of the things I've done at Zaha, they were not meant for living. Let's create these assets in a digital world. Yes, it does have a footprint, a carbon footprint. It is not casting shadows after other houses. It's not having an influence on our environment. And it is a subtle exchange of profitable assets that are virtual. So going to the virtual world was also a way for me to stop being part of this wave of overbuilding our world. And I know we are architects. There's no real answer for that, I think. I mean, what do you think? How do you feel about building?
What you answered your own thing. When you're talking about the real estate is being built, somebody's sixth house or the seventh house, that whole need to overbuild comes from, I guess, boredom, comes from making so much of money that you don't know where to spend it. So you keep buying new houses. So at least in that sense, you are diverting the attention of that money being put into not a real, but a virtual asset. And there are real-time problems. Then, I mean, architects are then free to look at I'm looking at a future scenario where the real-time problems can be seen. Till now, we've not looked at digital fabrication for making houses which are affordable housing. We are only making it into an elite segment. I mean, when you talk about a 3D printing, whether you talk about laser cutting, CNC machines, we're only talking about the industries which produce luxury products. You take the automobile industry, you take the aircraft industry, they've got the best of technology of digital fabrication, which is not expensive as a technology when you look at it. I mean, if you populate the world with a lot of printers and a lot of robotic construction, just the way you build cars, if you can build millions of cars, why can't you build millions of homes? Is the big question. And it's not very different in order to do that. It's just that somebody needs to direct and say, not here, put it here. Put this resource here instead of putting it here. So we don't probably need so many cars, but we definitely need a lot of houses. There are homeless people across the world, and making a house in the way we've been constructing for the last 100 years is becoming more and more expensive for anybody to afford it. Not just financially, but even your emotional and your physical sort of involvement to build a house. Today, if somebody has to build a house in Delhi, a family home, it would take about 3 years. Your entire I'm talking about middle class here. your entire wealth that you have saved, and a lot of effort to just dealing with contractors and concrete and authorities and everything.
Yeah.
If there is a solution that you could buy a house like a car and it's customized to your needs, because digital fabrication could do that, I think a lot of problem of carbon footprint from the concrete, a lot of problems of financial sustainability, mass production could actually
Mhm.
help the problems. And both worlds could exist simultaneously, where it's not, the virtual world is not just for the entertainment, but it's also symbiotically helping the finances from there in the real world in solving the problems.
Mhm.
That's what I feel personally. And you don't know about the future, but I think the start is great. I love the whole concept of how you're building in the metaverse and looking at solutions for phobias. I don't think there's any design solution that can solve those problems in the real world. It is, you've taken it to the next level. There are some problems which cannot be solved in the physical world, because if the problem starts from the mind, then it has to be dealt in the space
Exactly.
which is dealing with the mind. It's not the physical space.
Exactly.
So yes, so I think that is one of the major problems. And we all know that a lot of problems start from the mind itself, whether it's the ego, whether it's the political crisis, whether it's anything. So a right training in the virtual environment, right from childhood, probably would maybe make us better human beings, more responsible human beings. I don't know. I mean, that's the future. So maybe one needs to build more and more into the virtual environment, which becomes
Mhm.
a training ground to train the mind to think better than what we've been thinking till now.
Mhm. Then, like, I'll give you back a question that everyone asks me on every talk I do. There's always this question. If we imagine a panorama in which architects are actually building the virtual environment, and it is ambitious, it is complex, it is rich, and architecture takes a different form and shape, would you see a future in which we stop challenging geometry in physical architecture because we are achieving it virtually?
Is achieving form and geometry a virtue of aesthetics, or is it a virtue of the structure? I mean, once you start building, once you take it to the engineering level, you know that half the structures, gravity is a pain in the ass. Let's face it.
Yeah.
You can design anything in the virtual world, but when it comes down to building in the physical world, a lot of it will need to be altered with the technology that's available or the gravity that you're fighting against. So I think it starts a new challenge. You could imagine something as a form in the virtual world, and you could be saturated with it. But when it comes
Yeah.
down to building in the real world, it starts a whole new story. Then that form doesn't remain exactly that form. And in order to still continue that spirit, you will have to start a whole new different challenge. And that's just a start on this planet. Tomorrow, imagine you're taking it to a different planet with lesser gravity, which is pretty
Yeah.
much a possibility in the next 50 years or 100 years. Would you build differently? Would you design differently? Would this design that you do forms a DNA to the design on another planet where gravity is much lesser? I think these are
Yeah.
all these wonderful questions that we must ask ourselves at the education level, where there is no limit. I think you've just started. It's just tip of the iceberg right now. I don't
Would you
think the
say that
form,
gravity was the biggest move forward for our architecture? Like the number one decision maker of our architecture was the gravity, period. I mean, there are
yeah,
many criteria, right?
always.
But would you say it was gravity, though?
Yeah, it
Would
was.
you? Or,
I, wouldn't it be? I mean, gravity and the available technology at that point in time. If we
all
didn't
right.
have gravity, suppose we didn't have it. For example, it's just a wild question. We didn't have it.
Yeah.
Was there ever uh, people thought, people wrote about things? I mean, Michelangelo talked about forms and shapes, or even Da Vinci for his aircrafts in those days when there was no aircraft. If there was no gravity, would you think we would have invented aircrafts earlier than much what we did
Yeah.
right now? Or the architecture would have been different? Would the pyramids of Egypt would be the pyramids of Egypt because they are what they are because of gravity? They are solid structures which hold
Definitely.
mummies inside. Would there be hollow structures? Would there be inverted pyramids if you were gravity? Because thinking has never stopped. When you talk about the Mayan architecture, it talks about the metaphysical. It The only restriction was to be able to build that. Mind has never stopped from centuries. Right from 5,000 years ago, people could think, but they couldn't do it. One was technology was a restriction. Second was gravity. It's a good question to ask at a student level. Because, these lines are getting blurred with the years to come. Maybe.
I was just thinking about that. I was just thinking that we can foresee a crisis that we will live. We are not living now, and I think we are just in a panic because we can't foresee it. A crisis in which our tool changes so radically that makes us wonder what is the outcome then? Because we have been using sort of the same tools, at least in the past 10 years, let's say, when we think about like CADs, like computer-aided design, 10 years, 20 years, right? So those were our tools. And then we see a new deal coming, Gen AI or just AI, and it makes us a bit anxious to think, okay, so if we have been relying so much on tools, which obviously we have, and we change the tool radically to like a Gen AI or anything more automated, what's the outcome? And I think that's why probably the topic brings us so much anxiety. It is, what is the outcome from this? But again, I think we also forget that we are the ones in charge of that.
Yeah.
There's no one else dealing with the tool except for us, right? So the outcome is, it should be whatever we want it to be. Which also brings me to like probably our last question, and ask you, what excites you the most? And this is the kind of questions that also I always love to end with when they ask me, what excites you the most on future of architecture and the future of engineering? And let's say a future, if it is the next 10 years.
I think I'm going to ask you the same question. We both need to answer this question in our own manner, but I'll answer first. Architecture has, if you talk about it, has been ruled by the engineers for quite some time. When you say the virtual world has been ruled by the UI UX designers, the real physical architecture has been ruled by structural engineers and other engineers who may or may not make the idea happen. So most of the modern architecture is filled. Concrete was always the wrong choice. You put a flat slab of concrete, you're fighting against gravity with the dead load of concrete itself. We did the Gothic churches with flying arches in stone, which were much lighter structures to look at than a flat slab concrete. So somewhere we did go wrong. I don't think it was the virtue of design that went wrong. More than the design itself, I think the way we looked at the engineering of it is what went wrong. So what excites me more in the future is both these streams coming together. Something that is not so independent of each other, and technology is there to help. So today, the tool of technology has helped blur that boundary between engineering and art. When you look at it, when you do simulations, when you do computational simulations, an architect is able to understand the forces of gravity or the wind or the water or the nature forces on the building much before an engineer comes in and says that, oh, that's not possible, let's just change it to something which is more mundane and more mediocre. So with these tools available, that those lines are getting blurred, architects are getting more confident, engineers are getting more confident about the design. I think engineers should start using the AI tools of visualization, and architects should start using the computational tools. So both the worlds would sort of merge together. Don't you think? That excites me.
And I wouldn't mind even.
Yeah, your view.
For me, honestly, first I think it excites me to meet you, Manish, and it excites me to meet people who have the same ambitions, even if we have like different generations. It's always very exciting because you do feel sometimes that you were kind of alone pushing for a boat and going against the tide, and it makes you wonder, like, why are you doing it, and why is there a tide, or are you the one in the wrong? So when you meet people like you and people like some of the people who are probably listening to us who care and who want to push for it, even though you'll suffer, but not to be passive against ties. I think that makes me very hopeful for a future in architecture, and very inspired as well as a designer in architecture. So that's one thing that excites me, is that there's still us, we are still there, and we are getting like more and more voice on like, let's change it. We change the course. The course doesn't change us, like we change it. And I'm a fan of that, of gaining power instead of like having power over me. And then on the other side, I also, a bit of what you said on the camera, I've been saying it for a long time as well when I saw AI emerging. I remember something about the Impressionism that I loved it when I learned it in history school. That was the fact that the whole point of art and painting was to capture reality, and the more realist, the better the artist was, right? Until the invention of camera, until the 19th century. And that was how you value artists. It was, how real is it, my portrait? Oh my God, this looks so real, even though it was painted. You are the best artist. And then the camera came in, and all the artists were probably like the same way that we are, like, oh my God, like, oh shit, like this captured reality better than I would ever. And then you start seeing Monet, and inventing something that is, you know what, it's not about the reality, it's about the way you capture reality. And that's Impressionism, right? With the sunsets that he did.
Yeah.
And he said, you know what, there's something called the fourth dimension, which is time. And if there's something that our camera cannot capture, it's time in a single frame. And he did it. And he made it a manifest, right? He made the next step of art and the next of artists. So to every action, there's a reaction and a reinvention. And I think we will see that one. Yes. I think you, me, and the people who are listening, we will see that reinvention post-AI. Yes. Which is the artist surviving and surpassing it and saying, you can do this well, I'll do this even better and differently. And I'm excited to see that, because I'm pretty sure it will happen. The counteract.
Yeah. I mean, we saw Dali happening. We saw Van Gogh happening. They all happened after, after the camera came in. So the surrealism, the entire movement, and that interests me a lot. And that interests me in architecture, to create that tension, to create that unknown, to keep understanding. And I think that with this point, I think we should stop talking. We should open up to questions. I think we have we exceeded time, people? We can go on and on, Mariana, and I think we can go on for hours.
I know.
So we are open to questions. If anybody has any questions to ask us.
Q&A. There's a lot. There's like 7 Q&As.
Yeah. Pick anyone.
Is there a possibility of software like Revit, V-Ray, and other architectural softwares to be used in VR or metaverse world, which will be easy to interact with and make any designs? So this is a very software-specific question, but it also has a very quick answer. When you're designing for a virtual world, you have a typical architectural practice, which is 3D modeling, and there's no rule, there's no recipe, right? Exactly the same as in architecture. You have your Rhino, you have whatever fits your needs and your expression. So you have your Rhino, you have Blender, or you can do Max, or you can do Maya, or you could do any SketchUp even. So the 3D modeling side is easy. It's up to you. And then the one that is the big question, and Revit as well. V-Ray is a rendering machine, so it doesn't make sense. So the big question that you're asking is, where is the real-time happening, the real-time rendering happening? And that's usually inside of Unreal Engine. And then Unreal Engine, which is from Epic Games, it's still an application, so it's something that you download, and to make it multiplayer, you'd have to code it. But what's happening right now, as we speak, is that there are browsers being created, like a www, which is immersive, which integrates Unreal Engine, and it's open for everyone to join and interact real time. So those right now, they're happening like Decentraland, but that looks terrible. But the ones with high fidelity and high resolution, they are appearing slower because of hardware and because of our capacity, graphics card, and how NVIDIA is moving and progressing on that. But for now, quick answer would be use Unreal Engine, wait for the browsers, and then you just upload your browser, and it's an immersive world that is open for everyone to interact real time inside.
I'll take the next one. I think there's one which says, while 3D printing is being used in construction globally, its application in India is still limited. Although urbanization demands structure taller than 1 or 2 stories, the feasibility of 3D printing for high-rise buildings is possible. Well, we have been 3D printing only using concrete till now in India. And there have been explorations of 3D printing using steel and other materials. The limitation, as we always keep talking about, is the material itself. It's not the tool that one is using. So there's a bridge that's been 3D printed in Amsterdam, which was printed in steel. And there are newer and newer materials that are being explored. So when you come to high-rise structures, when you talk about the seismic forces and the wind forces, more structures that respond. And I think Mariana would be the best person to answer that when you talk about exoskeleton structures, which Zaha is famous for. When you build it like a bone structure, you build it like a DNA structure, and you 3D print that, I don't think height is a restriction at that point in time. So it's just the right approach to design that one has to look at while looking at 3D printing rather than the conventional forms that one has been printing.
Yeah, it's a good question because I personally had a lot of faith on 3D printing, and then I never saw the next step after a specific scale, a physical scale. And because I never saw that, I probably believed in it less. I even want to sell my Ultimaker if anyone wants. But because it didn't pass the pavilion scale, not to dismerit the almost vernacular architecture that we have been seeing 3D printed, which is they are very nice and create very nice spaces. But it's very rare to see it, and it's very blurred for me to compare profit over results, final results. So I don't know where I would stand on 3D on 3D printing right now. Definitely less than I was 10 years ago.
You've completely moved to the virtual world, it seems.
No, I didn't. I'm a big fan of digital fabrication. That's the one I want to succeed.
I mean, do you miss building in the real time?
Everyone asks me that as well. Honestly, right now, I don't miss it. I feel a bigger purpose in there because I've seen the other side. I've seen who's doing it.
Right.
I've seen it, Manish. I've seen it, and it's scary as hell.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I know what you're saying. There is a whole lot that has to be explored in the virtual world.
Yeah.
I love building. I'm a craftsman. I'm an engineer by mind. I love to build craft spaces. And to me, I love the digital world. But somehow the feel of tactility, to feel those spaces, maybe to smell it, to touch it, somewhere I still have that.
I'm Mediterranean. I like to get my hands on touch materials, to smell it, to close eyes, feel texture. I'm fully Mediterranean, fully. I really appreciate physical contact. I appreciate being with people physically. But I think it was when I saw who was doing it. I was doing digital environments, and seeing the opportunity that it is, even on capital, the opportunity for architects, that we have been losing so much ground on that. The percentage that we are being paid for to build is so diminishing, and to who we are and how much we know about building. And then seeing that opportunity flourishing at its prime in a digital environment, and seeing that the people getting it are not the most indicated to do it, and we are missing that, it made me really, I don't know, it just changed my advocacy. I was like, okay, it's for this. At least for 10 years, it's for this.
Yeah.
And then one day probably I'll be back to touching it.
I mean, you never know. For all you know, another 10 years, I would be only building in the virtual world. I get sick of the actual construction industry. And I think it's just, as designers, you switch from one to another. We are always switching as avatars, as long as you have a purpose in mind. And the purpose always remains to break the mold, to remain positive, to remain this hopeful sort of person who's always hoping for something newer, something better in terms of the world, whether it's the physical world or the virtual world. It doesn't matter, because ultimately all these worlds are going to coexist tomorrow. They're already existing. So there's an interesting question for you. As you talked about virtual city designs, what is the scope of this in future, and how can one join this community and work in this place?
Well, I mean, how you can join, it will be as seamless as picking up your phone, right? That's what they are building. It's the hardware that is as seamless as you doing your TikTok scroll and Instagram scroll and go to WhatsApp. And that should be a seamless transition, which it does sound foreign to all of us. It feels weird to think that we'll pick up on something and then just enter. But look how foreign it is for us to be doing this, right? In London, we are all like this. And it's weird. And if it was 20 years ago, everyone would think this is so weird. And it will be as weird as that one. I would see that it will probably just feel, no, actually, I'm wrong. I was going to say it's just going to fulfill our need to socialize, our need for entertainment. But it's not true, because even when I started doing the cognitive industry, and there's a huge community in San Francisco actually applying this for cognitive health and for improving our brain, empowering it, making it stronger with virtual reality, that I think maybe in mainstream perspective, we would use it as a social tool. like to communicate with our friends. I don't know if you saw the beginning of social environments, right? Mirk, I don't know if you guys had Mirk or Gmail, but we were like chatting with our friends, and no one even questioned that. It was just normal to be chatting with your friends virtually, and it will just be in a bit more immersive and more three-dimensional as well. So that would be the purpose of these kind of futures. It's not as radical as we imagine. Probably one day will take a radical shape, but I don't think we will see it as a radical. It's just another seamless blend in our physical lives. And how we have access to it right now, like the most direct answer is you don't access to it. It's not there. It's not there yet. You have a billion of people building it.
But that brings me to an interesting question to you, that you're building avatars in the virtual world that you're doing.
Yeah.
And avatars have their personality. Those personalities are based on real personalities, the virtues of real people somewhere.
Yeah.
Maybe they are, maybe it's based on one person, maybe it's based on 10 personalities put together, the avatar.
Mhm.
Do you think there would be real-time jobs in the future when you're talking about mental and cognitive health for people to become mentors, or let's say the psychologists or the psychiatrists, to get into a virtual world, become avatars, and start really sort of mentoring or talking to people who are, I mean, right now you're doing one-to-one in a room. Most of the therapists do that.
Yeah.
Could the virtual world become a real-time world or a platform where these interactions flow more fluidly and more freely as a full-time job?
Yeah. It's a good question, and it's also like a sensible for me because I'm from a family of psychiatrists and psychologists. So I would always defend that nothing would replace them, right? Because it's my mom and my sister and my younger sister, and not just that. Like it's knowing that their value, it's very irreplaceable. As in the diagnosis, still, and I think probably will always need a human touch on diagnosing on what's your problem, where does this come from, and seeing the nuances of your story and thinking it's probably from there or it's probably from, but then it's the methods of how do we cope with it and how do we make it better, what's the recipe, the remedy that can be or will be empowered by virtual means, manipulated by both the patient and the therapist, right? It's also almost giving like a new tool to the therapist and saying, you can do it faster, you can do it better, and you can have more access to your patients and even inform your diagnose better. So in a way, I would never, it's a very sensible topic to see anything being replaced by something else, right? And especially therapists and any professional that has the know-how on how to treat ourselves internally, which is the most important ones, more than externally. I would like to think that it will always be human. Like I would really like to think that it will always be human.
It goes without saying, there is always a human touch. But the future generation or even the present generation that one is looking at, who's so completely plugged into the virtual world, into the mobile screens, into the social media, who don't like to meet people so much. I mean, the parties that happen,
I know.
a lot of generation today who doesn't like to go out. They would rather attend an entire virtual party sitting in their room rather than physically going out into the world. For them to come out with a mental problem or an issue is even more difficult confronting some human being. So maybe in a virtual world, it becomes easier and more comfortable to address that issue or a problem in a right environment. You're creating those environments already. All you need to do is populate with the right avatars into it, and it could just become a new tool.
I have like a question here for you, which is like an interpretation of a question that I have here. Since we have mostly an audience from students in India, what kind of recommendations would you give to students in India to row against the tide, which is like a long tide? What recommendations would you give them?
Two things. Throw away the last 100 years of architectural history. Number one, because I think we are obsessed in this country with modernism. We are obsessed in terms of looking at architectural design solutions only with one sort of set of issues. Every school and every college, nobody talks about what happened after the 1970s. History of architecture stops pretty much with modernism, and only there are minor touches to what's happening, what Zaha did or what the other architects did. After that, nobody even talks about it. Nobody talks about Rampulas and the complexities that he's dealt with. So I think that's number one. We need to kind of start from there, open up the mind into more, think like a kid. Before you became an architect, you thought like a kid. You did not box yourself into a square or a rectangle. Number two, I think there's been an influx of BIM softwares. in the educational institute. And BIM softwares are not, you and I know very well, are not meant for design. They're meant for construction or easing of construction. It's building information management systems. Students are using in this country to design, to using a BIM software. So the language of architecture that's coming out is fairly similar. You're using the same set of libraries, using the same set of assets. So nobody is intuitively working. I mean, you're doing great when you're teaching something like Maya, which is so intuitive as a software. It's like modeling. It's like using clay and thinking like a child and thinking like a kid to build and model anything. So the advice would be that yes, to re-look at, believe yourself before you joined architecture. How is it that you did the creative processes that you did? What made you become an architect from a sculptor or a painter? Because each one of us has a streak of that. That's why we came into this industry. Why did we throw that away? And if you were to use that, what is the tool that is the right tool for you to use in the future? Even if you were to use AI, and there's nothing wrong in using the AI, soon I think we'll all get saturated with the images of AI. We'll throw it away and it'll form a new sort of a look and feel to the entire thing. Everything is changing. So as a student of architecture, what is most important is to question whatever you have been doing, question everything around you, observe, see, question yourself, question your education system, and think and believe in yourself in terms of what is the newer method of going against the tide. Going against the tide, I think, is the most important. Yeah. Only 5% of students go against the tide and they become the outcasts. I think you and I were both outcasts from our institutes, somewhere or the other. But that needs to become the main cast and not an outcast going against the tide.
Yeah. But also, like, I would also like to stress that there's also a percentage on having the responsibility to understand the knowledge that is being passed to you, even though you don't agree at all. There's still this level of respect on the knowledge that they are giving you, right? It's just, you don't need to have a physical manifestation on not agreeing, but you need to go home and question it to its core, like question it internally. Why are they telling you to do this and that? And does not mean that you're going to challenge them on every recommendation or on every crit jury. You're not going to have this, brat attitude saying, no, I don't believe in this or that. Listen, be humble to the knowledge that is being passed to you, but go home and question that there's no absolute answer to anything, and they are not more right than you are, right? And there's no truth to it. So it's just staying critical about the knowledge that is being passed and about yourself as well, and the things that you are doing, and questioning yourself as well. That's kind of what made me go through university. But like you said, I was very much like the outcast. Like I heard very, very horrible things. I've heard an actual architect telling me that I was going to do very mean things to the world. Like he literally said the word mean. And I laughed, but it makes you a bit upset, right? Because that's the profession that you thought you were like made for. And in reality, it's like I gave myself the freedom to be critical and to ask myself why I was doing that and why I encouraged to do something else. And I agree with you 100%. I don't know why, but that's like an actual like palpable question. Why did we stop teaching until the 1970s? We stopped. Why are we doing CADs? Why are we doing digital tools? We have classes for digital tools, but no one taught us what computer-aided design is. Yes. No one told us. We are using their tools, but no one explained us who invented computer-aided design. What is algorithm-aided design? What did Peter Eisman do? What did Frank Gehry do? What did Greg Lynn do? What is iterative design? What is generative design? We use our tools. We stopped the type of architecture way before the tools. So maybe the tools don't even make sense to the type of architecture we are doing even. Exactly. Because if we are doing architecture from the 50s with tools from the 2000s, why would this like in any way make any sense? So that's why we are doing digital tools in the wrong way. We are not using them for generation. We are using them for drawings, which is like a tiny, tiny potential of what digital tools have. So I really wonder what is stopping them to teach the 2000s and the 90s and the 80s.
Yeah. It's difficult to analyze probably the designs that have been done using. It's difficult to analyze probably what Gary did using CATIA, because there is a lot of you need to have a history of technology and computers in place. And I don't know, maybe you and I should start teaching history of architecture in a different manner. And that
I
would
thought
be a
about it,
course.
but then it's like a fight. Not everything is your fight, you know. At some point, I was like, "This is not my fight."
Yeah, it's not. It's
There
not.
are
It's not.
so many other fights. I was like, "Not this one."
But I think now, since you're here and there are a lot of students who are wanting to hear about your work, there's a very interesting question, and it is a direct question to you. How does fluid designs or the unconventional design language be used besides the aesthetic part of the structure? Can you, Mariana, tell us about it more with respect to the Navi Mumbai airport?
Oh,
Very specific.
that was very specific.
Yeah.
First, I think I'm from a school that had a very big taboo on aesthetics. You should not say the word aesthetics or beauty. And now I'm working with a work partner from Poland who wrote a whole article on beauty, which is beauty in architecture, which it is very fragile and it can hurt a lot of egos and hurt a lot of people because it's such a taboo. And it made so much sense because it's also neurological, it's also chemical. What happens to us when we perceive beauty changes us biologically and chemically for a state of well-being. So why in school are we forbidden to say and to take as a valid criteria beauty for creation when we know that it changes us chemically, when we know that it encourages well-being? So that was one, and I never stopped me from trying to achieve beauty when I'm designing, whatever it means. Is it subjective? Do we have different means of beauty? Is it the Greek one? Is it symmetry? Is it balance? Like whatever it is, I don't know, but I want to achieve beauty when I'm designing, and I take it as a valid criteria, like as a measure of how good my architecture is. And beauty sometimes come with aesthetics. They don't mean the same thing, but they makes us think that it's an apparent state, an apparent and a very superficial way to see it, but it is a valid one. And that's why I kind of relate aesthetics and beauty. So that would answer the need of creating beauty. And then when it came to India and to Navi Mumbai, actually, the client, Sanjay, he was not an architect and a strong advocate for beauty and for your culture, for India culture, and for intricacy and for complexity and for richness in humble, not richness as in luxury, richness in culture. And that was some very enlightening meetings. We had the Navi Mumbai, we had meetings until like you could not take it anymore. And they would come from Mumbai, they all sit around the table and teach you what Indian culture is, and then you have to design based on it. And it made me see India in a very different way, especially to see a client that was so rich and so wealthy, to see beauty in such a humble, genuine, and cultural way. And that inspired me a lot to be part of the creation of Navi Mumbai. And I was the designer of the big columns. They are the lotus columns. They were not flowers. They made me make it look more like flowers. That's also a very Indian thing. Like, make it more illustrative. And I was like, oh, no, they look like flowers. They're like, we want flowers. Like, okay, cool. But there's a beauty and an elegance to it that is not a coincidence. It's very much on purpose. And it's to add value to space and to your well-being, for you to enter the space and feel it, like feel in your heart the beauty of the architecture. And that, like, I hope, fingers crossed, we'll get to see the columns. I just saw a piece the other day, so they are building it. And I hope that it will spark this to you, to the person who wrote the question, and to Manish, obviously, to enter the space and to feel the beauty in it, and as a valid criteria for designing.
I think that it's an interesting point when you say about India and the Indian culture and how you were asked to incorporate an icon or an image of a flower into the design. I've been dealing with this question and I've been trying to understand the Indian architecture, or what is the ethos of Indian architecture, traditional architecture. When you go back to the vernacular, there was no distinction between art and architecture. The houses were painted by the artists in various patterns. So you built your own house out of mud and you painted patterns over it. And the patterns were not meaningless patterns. They represented your way of life. They represented a certain story. There was maybe a scientific reason behind it, maybe the weather, maybe your family wealth, something or the other. It represented through art. When we look at the modern architecture, and I'm not talking about modernism here, that's totally dry and bland. When we talk about the architecture that you and I are doing, today, which is about aesthetics, which is about various things, how much are we looking at artists becoming part of the architecture, of the form? And to what level? Because art also has changed a lot of meaning and a lot of interpretations today. How well are we integrating art with this together? Because I mean, that would be
Yeah.
probably the future of Indian architecture as I see it. Because in India, art and architecture are not two separate entities. They are all combined together. Everybody adorns their houses with some art form, with some artistic thing, whether it's a good or a bad thing, it's not the question. Somebody puts up a replica, somebody puts up a fake thing, somebody puts up a real thing. But doing murals and art and painting is part of the Indian culture. How does one take that in the modern language of architecture of today or the future?
Man, yeah. Is this a question? Because I don't know.
It's a question. It's a question when you're using technology. How well are you kind of incorporating art and architecture together? Let's say when
You
you're
know,
building for the metaverse. You have
I don't
artists on
see.
board.
Apart from the question when you were speaking, when I think about India and I did gather like an identity as a traveler. You're gonna be angry about this, but I saw an identity that was also built with modern architecture. I cannot unsee it. I think it might be at this point part of its DNA more than we want to accept it, but it is on its DNA. You know, it doesn't make justice to the culture, but it is of the culture. Like when I imagine it, I cannot. I see both. I see this extremely rich, culturally rich, visually very rich, and then the other one that was simplistic answer to numbers, but with a little bit of beauty still in it, like in simplicity,
Hmm,
not the
hmm,
pigeonholes.
hmm.
Um, so I don't know what the answer for Indian architecture will be, even if it's like done virtually or like the future of it. But you did a great job capturing it with the project with
Yeah.
the water sports one in Goa, because it is there's a gray to it that still relates to the culture without being too evidently Indian. You know what I mean? Which, for example, what it's asked to me is to make it very evidently Indian, like the Navi Mumbai or the Ahmedabad. It's very obvious that it is Indian, but you made it like you kind of merge, probably against your will, this modernistic side of India, which is has a little bit of gray, has a little bit of heaviness. And I don't know if it was on purpose or maybe this was on your subconscious.
I like to have fun with architecture. I like to make sarcastic remarks through my design at times or what is there. So when there is brutalism and it's so much in the face of the Indian
Yeah.
architecture, the rough concrete and those lines, you can't avoid it. And then there are good interpretations and there are really bad interpretations of it in our cities. So for me, doing an architectural expression is, as I said, a question to the next architectural project. So it's never a complete project. It's always a question to the next one. It's work in progress. So for me to incorporate that poetic expression of the roof along with those hard, brutalistic gray lines of the louvers and the local concrete was more of a sarcastic remark that if this is what it has to be, then let it be. You know, let it be as a bold statement in your face. And everything doesn't have to be like I was in two minds that time to make the windows and to make those things in a more curved, in a more aesthetic manner, the
Yeah.
way the roof is. You know how you've done it, how you do these things. But then I said, let there be some sort of a sarcasm to the language of architecture. Let me not make it so this thing. Let me make it a question mark to people. Why this and why not that? And you
Yeah.
asked the right question. And this question is what I want people to ask. I want people to get uncomfortable. There is that bit of a tension there because it lies in between. When I look at the churches in Europe, which started in the Gothic era, they went into the Renaissance era, suddenly you see the facade changing. You have a certain era and you have another era on top, and the roof is totally different. It makes you question that the building that started in one era and probably got completed in the other one, what
Yeah.
was the person thinking? Was there a same designer or there were multiple minds? So I like to think that it's not a single mind that's thinking, but it's a more collective thinking when it comes down to buildings that we do or the buildings that we do. I would rather have a more collective thinking than an individual mind out here. And
No,
and
I
that's what
agree.
collaborations. And that's the thing about India in future, I guess, that we've all lived too much with this image of a single architect or the master architect. I think slowly, with the collaborative world, with more artists and more sculptors and more scientists and philosophers coming together, architecture is not just the virtue of an architect. We have too much of weight
Yeah.
on our shoulders, and we carry too much of weight unnecessarily. I think we should offload certain weight, and we don't have the responsibility only as architects to change this world. There are other people, and we need to collaborate
Yeah.
more and more with the rest of the world.
I agree with that, and that increase. Surprisingly enough, that applies a lot to the virtual world as well. It's not just
Yes,
architects; we barely know how to put it up in the virtual reality. There's like a need of collaborate. It's not just a need; it's also an opportunity to collaborate with practitioners, for example, with the therapists. They would probably tell you what kind of like therapy room it should be. They should be like handling their appointments. So they will tell you. It's not like they just rent the space and then they do their job. It's the opposite now. Now they tell you, this is how I want my space to be, and you do it. So this is kind of a new opportunity for collaborating in the virtual world is arising, and that's also very exciting for me because I also don't see the architect as like this mega mastermind, like high ego building the world. Not at all. It's like, and we are also coming to this notion of collectiveness that it was not there before with virtual reality. Actually, we feel like a collective, the whole world, more than before, because we are in touch with everyone from around the world, and that also increases the responsibility of working together. And it should be exciting more than a problem. So yeah, and now I'm going to be in India in September. Manish, I need to visit you in New Delhi.
absolutely,
Speaking of collaborations, I want to visit the office and we go for lunch. Is
absolutely.
it
Most
settled?
welcome. You would love you to. I mean, we can continue our discussions over coffee. We have time limit today, but in our office, I think we can go on for an entire day of talking, discussing, collaborating. There's lots happening in future
Definitely.
where we could, collaborate together. So
Let's
it's
do it. I'll
fantastic
bother
having
you.
you. Yeah, yeah. No, no. I you have to, and a good Indian meal
I
is
will.
on me. Thank you so much, Mariana. I would let
Thank you so
the
much, Manish.
Godrej people take over on this now, and let this be an end of this. Thank you so much, Mariana, for being with. I think it
Thank
was
you,
a
everyone.
wonderful
Thanks,
session.
Manish.
Wonderful
A
session.
pleasure.
Thank you all for joining us for today's very insightful episode of VC Live Season 3. We hope you found the conversation dynamic, inspiring, and thought-provoking. A very special thank you to Mr. Shyam Motwani for taking the time to join us today, to our experts for sharing their knowledge, their insights, their wisdom on designing the future, for showing us how innovative thinking and technology can really transform the way we look at architecture. Thank you all once again for joining us for this wonderful conversation. Stay tuned for all updates for our next few episodes. Have a wonderful day and see you in episode 2.